Hey there, it's me, Phil. I'm here with Lecrae. Hey, Lecrae, how you doing?
All is well. How are you?
Good. We just had a false start, so we're starting again. And you were telling me that you have a family in Dallas and in Houston. You're in Atlanta, so you have all your utilities functioning. You can get food, you can make fire, you can make mac and cheese, you can do all the vital things of life. But you do have family. Are they okay now?
They are okay now. My mom was the one I was most concerned about. She had like rolling power, so she'd have power for like an hour, and then she wouldn't have power for a few hours. And so she just would put herself on a schedule. Whenever the power hit, is when she cooked her food or ran the water or did something immediately.
Yeah, well, I guess that's kind of the case in big chunks of the world where the power is not always on. You get, 2 or 3 hours a day and you have to time all your activities. We are not used to that here.
Wow.
That's not how we're supposed to live in America. So you are okay. Okay. I don't want to take too much of your time because you have to go produce 10 more albums or something. You've got a new album out, Restoration. You're nominated for 2 Grammys. You're working on a new mixtape. You have 2 songs on the Spider-Man Miles Morales soundtrack. You started a school. You apparently are rebuilding half of Atlanta. You, you, you're keeping families from losing their homes in foreclosure, and you're involved in prison ministry.
It's pretty much, yeah.
So then you hit lunchtime, and what do you do with your afternoons?
Oh man, just avoid critics online. That's what I do the rest of my day.
How do you like to be busy? I'm going to assume you like to be busy.
Yeah, I do. I think I get that from my mother, my grandmother. I like to, I'm a catalyzer. I like to see things start and get people going, and I love that type of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So, is there with all the activities that you're in, all the different things that you're doing? You have a record label, and you're launching other artists as well on your label. Do you feel like there's a motivating principle or something that's like, this is how I know if I want to be involved in something? This is why I do what I do.
That's good. Yeah, I think I learned early on that I'm very passionate and motivated by disenfranchised and marginalized communities and people groups. So there's always like a burden there and a passion there to invest in them. But then I try to, over the last few years, just with family, I try to localize everything. So just trying to make it as local as I possibly can instead of spreading
Okay.
myself all around the country.
Yep. Yep. And how old are your kids?
13, 12, and 9.
And are you starting to involve them in these activities?
Yeah, that's been cool as well. Obviously not the prison work, but they've had to do a lot of the community work. My daughter is trying to win a grant for one of the schools that I'm involved with. So it's pretty awesome to see them.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So some of our audience will be familiar with your backstory. Some of our audience will not. I've read a little bit your background. Your childhood was not fantastic.
No,
Uh,
definitely nothing to write. Not storybook. Not a Once Upon a
could
Time.
have could have been better.
Yeah.
Could have been better. But what I wanted to focus on was your church experience. In your church, what was your exposure to church growing up?
We were CME Christians, Christmas, Mother's Day, Easter.
Okay.
Christians. My grandmother was a very devout Christian. So she had become a Christian in her 40s and was like serious after that. So when I would stay with my grandmother, um, I was I was in her church. She was an evangelist and she would lead church, and that was my exposure to it. But when I was staying with my mother, maybe a holiday, occasionally we would go, but my mother was like, she experienced church abuse. And so she was like, I don't like it. So, be a free thinker. So I was kind of raised that way, being a free thinker with a dab of church here and there.
Okay. And your grandmother's church, was it a traditional African American
Yeah,
congregation?
traditional, Church of God in Christ,
Okay.
kind of, Pentecostal holiness movement. But it was my only exposure to church, was kind of like the traditional historical Black
Right.
church experience.
So how old were you when you became aware that there was a Black church and a white church?
I was probably about 20 years old. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but when did you start recording?
Well, I mean, professionally, probably around 24,
Okay.
23, 24. But I always recorded music, just growing up.
Okay. So you're 20 years old. What's your aha moment? It's like, wow, there's two different churches in America and they're not the same.
Yeah, so I was a part of I became a Christian at 19, campus Bible study. We went to a conference, and it was African American ministry, and a lot of African American churches participated in this. And the campus leader said, "Hey, I'm getting discipled by this former football player, but he goes to another church, and he said we should all go to his church." And we went to the church, and I was like, whoa. I had never been to like a white church before. So it was just night and day different. It was calm and a little more silent. It was, I was like, I felt like I was in a box kind of sort of. I was like, can I clap? I don't know what to do. So it was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And did you going back and forth after that? Did you go back and forth much?
So I did, because he really started growing there, and he was teaching us a lot of stuff. And we were saying, man, where can we learn this type of information? And we weren't thinking of it as like black and white. We just thought of it as like, oh, this place is more cerebral, and we're getting intellectual information. And I grew up that way anyway, like, reading all the time, thinking a little more cerebral. And so, they were appealing to that aspect of who I was. And the more the emotional, historical African American church tradition, um, you know, I wasn't getting the same thing. There were churches probably like that, but I
Right.
wasn't. I wasn't exposed to them.
Right. So the teaching focus, the
Yeah.
kind of
Yep.
yes, let's go C.S. Lewis on you over here
Exactly.
versus really great music over here.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
like, can we have both? And wouldn't it be great if we could have
Oh
both?
man, I'm telling you, it's a beautiful thing.
If C.S. Lewis had rhythm, wouldn't that have been wonderful? But it just didn't work out that way. So okay, so when you started recording music, what when you started, were you thinking, I think I'm making Christian music? Or were you just thinking I'm making music and I'm a Christian?
Well, I think I thought I was making Christian music. For me, it was like a natural expression. So I was just expressing what I was learning. This was the first time I had learned any of this type of stuff. Um, some of the guys who were mentoring me started going to seminary at a conservative evangelical seminary. And so I was now like learning the stuff they were learning vicariously through them. And I just started writing that stuff down. I didn't know, like it had a category or anything. It was just like I'm writing about my relationship with God and all this information I'm learning.
You didn't know if you were becoming a Baptist or a
No
Presbyterian or
idea.
yeah, no idea. So okay, so when you started recording music and you're working your faith into your music, were you thinking, I think this is for Black Christians, or I think this is for white Christians, or I don't know who this is for?
That's funny. I never thought about it from that regard. I just knew where I was constantly ending up, and I was constantly in front of traditional Black churches, because initially, that was kind of the network that I knew. So oftentimes it would be a youth group and different places along those lines, outreach in the inner city somewhere,
Hmm.
and those are the people I was standing in front of. And I think what ended up happening was, well, I know what ended up happening is that I performed at an inner city sports camp that was sponsored by a bigger evangelical kind of Christian camp. And those counselors heard what I was doing for the inner city kids and said, we need that over here as well.
Come to the suburbs. Can we
Yeah.
can we lure you to the suburbs?
Yeah.
Okay. And so What year is this? When did you start?
This is
Like,
around 04, 05.
okay, was there a noticeable hip hop segment of Christian music at that time?
It was small. I mean,
It's
it
like
existed, but it was small. It wasn't like
Kirk Franklin and his backup.
I mean, obviously Kirk was on another level. Like this
Yeah.
was we were like this little hodgepodge of underground,
Kirk
you
was
know.
an opening for you at
Right.
the
No, no,
at the camps. No.
not at all.
Okay. So do you think at that time, do you think it hadn't really caught on in, in suburban churches yet? Do you
No.
think you were one of the first ones to kind of bring hip hop into suburban white churches?
I would say like the authentic kind of, hip hop as it pertained to like it's coming from the black culture
Right.
experience. I think we definitely made it more prominent. Prior to us was a group called Cross Movement who did do a lot of things in the urban community. And because the leader was starting to go to seminary, they were getting more opportunities, but it was nothing like what we
Yeah.
were pushing forward. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were just, was it your goal to follow in Toby Mac's footsteps and
No, no.
do?
Toby's a great guy. I think he's a great guy, but that to us was not hip hop. It wasn't rap.
Yeah. Okay. 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 So, when did you realize that you were actually doing really, really well in suburban white Christian America? And when did you realize that that might actually have a downside?
So I remember the audiences, getting bigger and bigger, but whiter and whiter, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
What years would this be?
Probably around 2009, 2010.
Okay.
And we would do this tour, me and my friends at the label. And I remember one of my friends, Show Baraka, he said, "I can't do this anymore." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "I just can't stand in front of these suburban kids and give them my everything I have when there's a group of individuals who don't have access to this. I just need to figure out how to get in front of them." And I was like, I mean, they pay on time.
They,
I don't
they
know.
don't they don't throw beer bottles at the stage.
I was like, hey, I'm not. I don't see the problem. And so that was the first kind of inkling that wow, maybe I should. I never even thought about this, but he kind of put that seed in my mind.
Right,
And
right. Is there a problem that you should see
exactly,
that you're not seeing?
exactly. And so what we started doing from there is saying, all right, we're going to find urban ministries and sponsor them to come because they may not because the ticket price goes up when there's more people.
Right.
We're going to go to like juvenile detention centers and outreaches and try to like figure out ways to incorporate it and bring in some promoters and figure some stuff out, but it would pale in comparison. And then I just began to realize um that certain songs were bigger, and I was like, why do they like this song, that has a little more of a contemporary Christian vibe more than they like this urban kind of grittier song. And that's when I realized, okay, I think I have crossed over too far.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever find yourself? Oh, back up first. You started your own record label.
Yeah.
Why didn't you go to Nashville and try to sign with one of the normal, Christian labels?
They were not touching us with a 10-foot pole. We were like,
Really?
yeah, we were too urban for the church or too street for the church and too churchy for the street. So it was kind of like Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg wasn't going to touch us, and neither were Nashville. It was kind of like we had to carve our own lane.
So did you start your own label out of necessity then? It
Yeah,
wasn't like a goal that,
total necessity.
it wasn't just step 2 on the way to having your own apparel company?
Nah, I wish I could take credit for being that and forward thinking, but
Yeah.
no, that wasn't it.
You're not that Dr. Dre. Okay, so I mean, so much has happened in the last few years. So there was a period of time, like 2009 to when you were comfortable kind of with a foot in the hip hop world and a foot in white suburban Christianity. How long did that last? And when did it become? Because you've tweeted some things. I have a couple of your tweets here that show, and then also, because I told you already, I reached out to Pastor Charlie Dates to say, what would you ask? What would you ask Lecrae in an interview? And one of the things he just sent me was just your song Facts. He
Oh,
just
wow.
said, just read the lyrics to this song.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah. So what year was that? Was it 2017, 16?
17, yeah.
17. Okay. So 2009, you're saying, what's the matter? what's the problem? 2017, you put out a song that says things like, man, now they acting like I'm suddenly political, told me shut my mouth and get my checks from evangelicals. Okay. So that's what happened between 2009 and 2017.
How things have changed. Well, I began to face criticism incrementally, right? I didn't like see the correlation or like how this was a pattern. I didn't catch the pattern. So consistently when I did things that would for all intents and purposes were black or urban.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say black, I guess I mean African American, culturally African American, because sometimes you say black, people think you're talking about skin color.
Right.
When I did things that were culturally African American, like I made a mixtape featuring a lot of mainstream hip hop artists because I wanted to connect with them, reach them, and insert in that world. I was criticized by white evangelicals for those collaborations, and I was like, oh, well, they're just being a little bit religious. I'll just continue doing my thing. And then it would just be, little things, going to the BET Awards. And I was like, well, I need to be there because, you know what I mean? Black entertainment television, so on and so forth, criticized for being there, you're getting too worldly. And this pattern started where I just, by 2014, 15, I was a little jaded and just like, you guys are always criticizing everything I do. Stop. And then I made a statement on Facebook when Trayvon Martin had passed away. I think it was 2014. And they just berated me. And I was like, now time out. Wait a minute. I'm confused. We're a family. I didn't grow up with this healthy family. This is my new family. Why are we so dysfunctional? What's going on here? I'm saying I'm sad about this. What did I say wrong?
Aren't families healthy in the suburbs? Is it that?
Clearly, that's what I thought.
Yeah. I watched Blind Side. They look like they got all their stuff together, right?
According to Blind Side, yeah, all the answers are there,
in the suburbs.
And so, yeah, and I was. It's in my mind, I'm blown away because I'm thinking like, have you not seen the consistency of everything that I've done over the last few years? Like, what is it about this? Yeah. And I thought maybe I said it wrong. I said, oh, maybe I shouldn't have typed it. Let me just say it. So I made a video just saying, man, this breaks my heart. And
that took care of the problem. That just
I thought that was going to clear it all up. The backlash was worse. And so I was just disoriented. And I think that was 2014. For the next few years, up till 16, it was just a disorienting process from Mike Brown to Eric Gardner, Sandra Bland. Yep. Anytime I would make a statement and I'm thinking to myself, why do they think this is political? This is my real life, my real existence. And I was confused.
Yeah. And 2016, so now you're getting to Philando Castile and then then things really start to accelerate through last year and George Floyd. So you actually segued into one of Pastor Charlie's questions to you. Set it up wonderfully, so I'm going to jump to it now. I said, Pastor Charlie, what should I ask Lecrae? And this was the first thing he said. He said, in your song Facts, from your 2017 album All Things Work Together, in case you don't remember that song.
Yeah.
It's from that album. You write, I know you think I'm too black. And then he asks, describe for us your read on white evangelicalism's fear of people who you might call too black. Why does that make us uncomfortable?
Wow, that's good.
Yeah.
Um,
That's not my question.
yeah,
I'm not that good.
I think that again, there's so much correlation with mainstream media's depiction of Black culture, African American culture, as negative, as sinful, as evil, that any kind of acquiescence or movement toward that has the appearance of evil to them, right?
Okay.
Media says people who wear their pants like that or their hats like this, or even like I had braids. When I started getting braids and my people dreads, they were like, "Oh no, you're looking like a thug," and I was like, "What? Wait, you associate those things with what mainstream media has attached to it." And oftentimes it's what the film and TV shows that you've created have attached to it. And so they were in their mind, I'm moving in the direction of evil instead of
Right.
in the direction of cultural norms.
So cultural norms, meaning the dominant culture, my norms,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
norms. I grew up in Iowa, in a town of about 25,000 people, going into a small evangelical free church in a small town in Iowa.
Oh
A-
wow.
And I know for a fact that the way we did life was the Christian way to do life.
Okay.
I know that. So clearly then, if you come, from the inner city and you are embracing Jesus, your life should start to look more like my life,
Nailed it.
right?
I need to
Okay.
start looking more like an Iowa kid from Iowa.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So did I get is any of that wrong?
No, you
Is
nailed it.
and what's and okay, have you worked up like when you saw that? Did you work up a response? Did you really like because you're a thinker, you're driven by intellect. So did you sit down and like write your thesis paper for this is why you guys are thinking about this wrong? Or did that come out in your music instead?
It would
Like it,
oftentimes come out in the music, and I'll be honest. Sometimes it was in more of a it was a rebellious sense, like challenging them. Like, I've moved into one of the worst neighborhoods in the United States. I witness murders every day, but I'm here to see transformation. How else is transformation going to happen if I'm not here? What do you, and then, I would write songs like, what do you want these people to do? Wear suits and ties and leave their whole culture behind in order to, you know, they'll be rendered ineffective. And so,
are you familiar with the history of world missions? Where
exactly.
we actually did that and made them wear suits and ties and leave their whole culture behind. So that I mean, that's got to be a part of it. Of you're like you inner city African American are an unreached people group,
Mm,
and I will reach you and I'll bring you the gospel, and then you'll start dressing like a Westerner, and I'll bring so we've gotten pretty good at saying, like, if you take missiology classes, at most seminaries, they'll say, "Don't do that anymore. We
right,
don't do that anymore."
right,
Let the gospel um, meet the culture where it is. Don't
exactly,
make them walk out of their culture. Maybe we haven't quite gotten to that point with African American culture.
exactly. And I think part of the problem is because I'll say white Americans tend to think of themselves as acultural. So they think this is American culture.
Right,
Just be American.
right,
And from minorities' perspective, we're saying, no, you mean be white, because that's not American, it's white. Baseball is not American, it's white. It's, and now it's full of players that aren't white, but it's a white American pastime in terms of like who champions it, who owns the teams, so on and so forth.
right.
American Pie, Sweet Home Alabama, those are not American. Those are more white American, cultural items.
Devil went down to Georgia.
It's all those.
Classic Americana. Cracker Barrel? Is Cracker Barrel
Cracker
American
Barrel,
or
case
is it
in point.
white?
Now I mess with Cracker Barrel, but at the same time, yes,
How many of your albums are available through Cracker Barrels?
I'm pretty sure Cracker Barrel has not solicited my
No
music.
albums. Okay. On January 2nd of this year, you tweeted, "For the record, you don't have to be what evangelicalism / the religious right says you have to be to love the Lord. I'm not the leftist or Marxist they fear me being, and I'm not the right-wing conservative they demand I be. I'm a Christ follower." What led you to, was that just out of the blue? Just anything precipitate that
No.
tweet?
So there's so much that's happened, and I'm not sure if this was a specific moment, but I do remember this. I was invited to perform by the mayor at a vote early rally. And what was communicated to me was both candidates will be there. Now I'm thinking it's bipartisan, both candidates. I'm not thinking, oh, both Democratic candidates.
Okay.
Didn't realize that. But so I go, I say, well, I'm going to be nonpartisan in terms of how I'm going to approach this. And I'll just do a song and tell people, make sure you vote. Well, because it was two Democratic candidates there, they now had, just said, I am now the proponent or the endorser of a Democratic Party, and this is where my flagpole is, and I'm now, for abortion and all these narratives. And I was just like, you guys are crazy. You're just going crazy with this stuff. Like, first of all, I'm not gonna sit here and write up a defense because I think there are wonderful Christians on both sides of the political aisle.
Mhm.
And second of all, you guys are making it seem as if you have to be Trump supporting, Second Amendment T-shirt wearing person in order to love Jesus. And I was like, this is crazy. And if you're not, you're clearly a Marxist and a pro-choice liberal demon.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? So,
Now, were you called a Marxist before this year?
no, I don't
No?
think so.
Okay. Because
I may have been for bringing up black. I think when CRT got popular, they started
yeah,
Black Lives Matter. They started telling me, "Hey, you be careful. That's a Marxist
yes,
organization."
you're
And
steering too close. You're
yes,
steering too close to the
yes,
socialists. Yeah, I became a Marxist, I think, officially last June.
okay.
Yeah, when a picture of me that I posted marching in a Black Lives Matter march circulated online,
Well,
and
that'll do it. Mm.
it didn't seem that controversial to me because my 80-year-old mother was marching with us, and our pastor from our church, who's Asian and half of white, Wheaton, Illinois, was marching. It was it was a march of lament. Actually, we were lamenting racial injustice. But the fact that we were wearing black T-shirts with messages on them, that
Mm.
goes viral, and suddenly I can't let my kids watch VeggieTales anymore now that I know that you're a Marxist. So is that what led Charlie Kirk? We all don't know who he is, right-wing activist Charlie Kirk, co-founder and name giver to the Fallkirk Center at Liberty University. He tweeted about you,
Mhm.
my now close friend Lecrae, which I now take offense to because we're now close friends. Said that's the guy, Lecrae, who we're listening to on K-Love, who we're supposed to look up to, who, in my personal opinion, should never be allowed to perform at another church after advocating for Raphael Warnock, who, if people don't know who he is, he was he's a pastor, the pastor of the church that was previously pastored by Martin Luther King. But he ran on the Democratic ticket for Senate in Georgia and won. He's now one of the Georgia senators. And here's my question. Do you think that it would have been less controversial for you to perform at that event if he hadn't come out and declared himself a pro-choice pastor? Or just the fact that he's a Democrat, was that bad enough?
I think the fact that he's a Democrat would have been, level 7 bad, maybe. But pro-choice pastors like level 11 bad
Okay.
for people.
Okay.
So, which is, it's all just a wild case of irony to me. But yeah, when I think about that, I think a no one did any investigation. They're all running wild with like accusations of presuppositions, presumptions. It's wild. And then two, I thought it was, it, what I've said. I said that comes off as racist rhetoric to me. And the reason why, when people hear racism, they tend to think KKK hats and I hate
Mm-hmm.
black people. When I'm speaking of racism, I'm thinking of like superiority. I'm thinking of we have power, we have control, and those who are not like us, we have the ability to push back against and tell them where they're allowed to come and where they're not allowed to come. And for me, I think it would behoove folks in that circle like Charlie Kirk to do their research to understand why by and large, African American Christians vote progressive. Why do they do that? By and large, white Christians vote conservative. Do the research to understand why that is, and say, maybe Lecrae is processing these particular things versus saying he's an antichrist. He's not a Christian at all.
Oh, but it's so much easier to do that, and it's more exciting. It's more
It gets
exciting.
provocative. It gets the people
Yes.
going.
Yes, because we need villains. We need villains and we need heroes. And, if you throw your flag into the villain category, then now we have something to talk about.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't know if you saw the video I did on voting, but why Black Americans vote Democrat, or Black Christians vote Democrat and white Christians vote Republican. But I did that because I was having conversations on Facebook where, I bump into someone else who says, no Christian could ever vote for a Democrat. And I'd reach out and say, well, in the last election, 92% of Black Protestants voted for Hillary Clinton. And the number of people that said, no, and it's like, no, okay, here's the data. And I realized that when you grow up, and I was this way too. I grew up in Iowa in an entirely white setting. I moved to the suburbs of Chicago around Wheaton, very Tony, upper middle class. And when I was in high school in the 80s, very white. And so my total experience of Christianity was a white experience of Christianity, which from the 80s on became just 100% aligned with Republican politics.
Mm-hmm.
So the notion that, especially kids that have grown up since then, that didn't see that happen, because I'm old enough to remember when we all voted for Jimmy Carter because he was the born again candidate. And that was before the big switch when we decided we could never again vote for another Democrat because they're on Satan's team and we want to be on God's team, which is the guy from California whose wife does seances in the White House. That's God's team, not the guy who builds houses for the homeless and teaches Sunday school in Georgia. That's Satan's team. So kids that have grown up since then have no experience of anything other than the post-Reagan revolution. They're just stunned. It's like, what do you mean Black Christians vote Democrat? Don't they know they're doing it wrong?
Yeah.
And so I assume you're bumping into some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And not a lot of thought put into it, which I was used to people not putting thought into their, it's kind of like, it's way more nuanced than this.
Yeah.
But I think the political climate of everything recently has just made people draw deep lines in the sand, just very deep. Like, we're not thinking about this at all. Nothing to think about. And I'm like, you are really, it pains me specifically for the church because they're beginning to make their allies their enemies. And that's
right.
Like,
right.
I mean, it doesn't get any worse. A house divided can't stand.
Yeah, I really feel, and I've said this before on the podcast, I really feel like the future of Christianity in North America is more in the hands of the non-white church than in the hands of the white church. And a big reason is just because the younger generations are so much more aware of injustice. They're growing up more multiculturally. They're growing up, they're more attracted to urban areas. They're not staying, on the farm or in the suburbs. They want to live in the city. And so they're exposed to more injustice. They're exposed to more racial and socioeconomic inequality. And the white church, if you know the history, in the early 20th century, we split. The liberals took social justice, and the fundamentalists took the gospel, and we ran in opposite directions. And that split didn't happen in the black church because they couldn't afford to separate the gospel from social justice. They couldn't afford. It was a matter of survival during
Yeah.
the time. This is like 1910s, 1920s. KKK is outside. You don't have time to say all that matters is sharing the gospel. So I do think the black church has a key role to play in showing us how to put it back together.
Mm.
And so voices like yours that are coming from the black urban experience, but also with everything you've learned and everything you've gained from reading broadly and learning broadly, I think it's absolutely key. Like Pastor Charlie Dates, I think it's absolutely key that we have thinkers like that don't have this false dichotomy of social justice or the gospel. Pick one.
Right.
And and if you pick this one, you're on Satan's team. so choose carefully.
Absolutely.
If you want to
what's
still
funny is I don't think, like, by and large, African Americans are pretty conservative in their perspectives. Christian African Americans pretty conservative. So for us, it's kind of like we can see how folks would want to vote conservatively or vote Republican.
Mhm.
We can totally. It's not like for us, we're like,
Right.
oh, how can
Right.
you call yourself a Christian? We get it, but on the other side of the aisle, we
Very much. How
crave.
could you call yourself a Christian? Is
Exactly.
very much that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so how all of this, you're trying to sort through this. You've sold a lot of records, you've been successful, you had a lot of fans, some of them got mad at you. Now, some people say you shouldn't be invited to churches. How has this affected your personal faith and your personal walk with Jesus? And has it been galvanizing overall and positive?
Mm.
What have you done to keep your equilibrium in your own walk with Christ?
Yeah. I mean, initially it was very detrimental, because I didn't have any other Christian context. I had left kind of everything that I had come to understand for this new world, and all these great leaders and thinkers and authors didn't seem to see where I was coming from, and so it made me scratch my head and say, well, how can they have to be right, but they can't be right, because everything else about them is right. So how can? And I was just so disoriented. I said, I'm done with what I know as Christianity, and I'm just going to go on a journey. And that it was a dangerous time for me because in that journey a lot of bitterness took root, and I found myself, what should have been a people wound became a God wound. It was kind of like I was blaming God for the wounds that I had encountered instead of broken humanity. And so I was very distant from God for a season. And that distance, led to me just running, and there's consequences for your running from God. God's gonna bring you back, and for me it was like he brought me back kicking and screaming, humbled, like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm done. But what happened to me in that process was I firmly believe that God was helping to remove an idol of acceptance and wanting to be accepted by people. And so I always say now, if you live for people's acceptance, you'll die from their rejection. And I needed to be able to stand on truth regardless of the rejection that I would encounter, and to walk in truth regardless. And so now it has galvanized my faith. Now it has made me say, I've got to stand firm because people need me. And if I shut my mouth or I acquiesce, then there's so many voices that will be silenced and suffocated.
Right. Right. I can kind of relate to that because when you make, I don't know if you made Veggie Tales, but I made Veggie Tales. So since it was one of us, I'll talk about it. Um, if you do something that is kind of universally loved, it feels really good.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I love this. I could get used to this feeling. I don't ever want to do anything that makes this feeling go away.
Yeah.
Um, and then you take a stand on some issue that some of your fans don't want you to take a stand on. It's like, oh, no, go do the tomato. Go, you do the tomato, go back and do the tomato. And it's like, I don't think I can go back.
Yeah.
I don't think I can go back because I'm meeting more people and I'm hearing their stories, and their stories are so different than mine that I can't pretend I haven't heard them.
Yeah.
And it's like, part of it, I've talked about this on the podcast when my church, which was an older white church, merged with a young growing Asian immigrant church. We put together two completely different congregations from an ethnic and cultural background, and getting to know people that have a completely different experience of American culture.
Mm.
It's like, oh, wow, that was not my growing up,
Mm.
So but it's hard because then somebody says, man, I used to love your work and I don't like it anymore.
Yes.
You go, oh, crap.
Yes.
That's like, I'm supposed to avoid that, right? That's like, so
Yes.
you've got a company, you've got a record label, you've got at least an assistant. I don't know how many people work for you, but you're rebuilding Atlanta and you're doing other stuff. So your source of funding is at risk
Right.
when you start to offend a portion of your audience.
Yeah.
That's got to give you pause, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think what it taught me is, like I mentioned in the song "Facts," is to build a life raft. You better build a life raft because this ship could sink at any minute, and if you want to continue to stand on truth, um, be prepared for that. So,
Mm-hmm.
it made me
And
say,
by that you mean that's when you started embezzling money from the record label and putting it in your mattress? Is that
not that kind of life raft. Not
what
that
am I
kind of life
supposed to
raft.
do? I want to take your advice. I'm just not quite clear.
Different life raft. No,
Okay.
for me, what it involved is taking real estate a little more seriously. Being a little more proactive in that particular area. Looking at aspects of my business that didn't involve me specifically and how I can grow those particular things.
Okay.
And because I didn't want anybody to control my mouth or my convictions. I didn't want people to say, I pay your bills, you do what I want you to do, you rap the raps I want to hear, or I'll stop paying your bills. And I
Right.
never wanted to be controlled like that. So
Which sounds dangerously close to shut up and dribble.
yes, it's
Yeah, which
same concept, exactly.
yeah, yeah, and honestly, I feel like I'm getting that a little bit of like, be funny. Be funny. Don't be controversial. We like you when you're funny. And I can't just be funny because this isn't a joke. It's not all a joke, folks.
Right.
And that's why I love, just like the comedy of Dave Chappelle and guys like that who like,
Yes.
for the next 10 minutes, you are probably not going to laugh at anything I say, but I'm going to keep talking anyway,
Yep.
and that's okay because he's earned the right. You can't do that when you're just starting out, but if you've earned the right to, if you love the guy, it's like, all right, I'll listen to you. And you can expose me to ideas that I would not accept from someone else.
Exactly.
Because I trust you. Okay. Last question. How about your kids? They're growing up in this mess
Yeah.
of 2019 2020 someone's trying to cancel dad again. How are you helping them separate their own faith from the cultural Christianity that is sometimes attacking their own father?
Yeah. Fortunately, um, we've been able to just openly process a lot of it. They don't know the visceral ugliness of how dad has been attacked. They just know that certain Christians think differently. And it's funny because my kids go to a Christian school, but it's there's lots of different perspectives there, so it's not like one kind of general perspective. But it's funny because we'll go through the scriptures, and something as simple as like going through Genesis and talking about how God told them to rest and Sabbath, and then I'll say, well, Moses is talking to the slaves who just got out of Egypt when he tells them this. So I wonder if their identity was wrapped up in being slaves and working, and maybe they needed to be reminded to rest. And my son is like, why don't my teachers ever talk about this kind of stuff? And I'm like, well, sometimes we got to dig a little deeper on our own and do our work. And so they are processing like this. We're not getting this in other places that we go to. And I just try to encourage them and say, hey, that's not always the goal. Obviously politics has come into the conversation a lot, and we're just trying to help them understand that daddy doesn't have all the answers, but whatever answers he does have, he's going to give them to you, and he's also going to challenge you to be free to think as well. Like you got to do some processing on your own.
Okay, so what do you think just going forward? Oh, you have your new book is. Wait a minute, I just scrolled off the name of your new book because
I'm Restored.
Yes, yeah. Restored. How I lost my religion but found my faith.
Yeah,
and that was like the journey of that couple of years.
Yeah,
right. What do you think what good do you think you can do for the church over the next 10 years? What are you trying to do? What difference do you hope you can make with your unique perspective and now the position, that God has allowed you to have?
Yeah, I think it's twofold for me. I think one, it's being consistent. When people see your consistency, they see like, okay, he's not just going with the flow. He's not saying this because it's the popular thing. Like, this is the trajectory of his life, and I can trust the consistency in order to listen. And then the other thing is invest, whether that is financially, emotionally, time. I just need to invest in people who can continue carrying this forward, and figuring out ways to do that. If that's education in schools, if that's smaller churches or organizations, how can I invest and use whatever I have to help people flourish, to continue a clear picture of what it looks like to follow the Lord. Because we don't just want to know what he knew, we want to walk as he walked.
Right. What gives you hope?
I think what gives me hope in one sense is that people like Martin Luther King, their ceiling is my floor. I get to walk on all of the work that they've accomplished. And so it looks dire historically, like, oh man, that was so terrible when they died. But then I think about, look at what I get to do. And what will my kids be able to do? What will their kids be able to do? So there's that sense. And then from a spiritual perspective, I think, man, the tomb is empty. Death is defeated. It was empty during the Trail of Tears. It was empty during the Holocaust. It was empty during slavery. If it was empty then and it's empty now, then nothing that will rise up will defeat death, and nothing's worse than eternal death. And so I'm confident that God is still at work.
Fantastic. Do you think there's hope for white evangelicalism?
Hey, the tomb's still empty. God can work some miracles.
God can raise the dead. This is what we know. Oh, Lecrae, that was awesome. Thanks for joining me on the show. Your newest album is Restored. Your book is Restored. Seems to be a theme.
Yes.
Kind of a theme going on.
I want that for us all.
License plates currently restored.
Haven't gone that far yet.
Haven't gone that far. Okay, keep us posted. We'd love to have you back sometime to talk more about doing the work you're doing in a culture that is deeply divided right now. But we really appreciate what you're doing. All right, that's Lecrae. Thanks for being on the show, man.
Appreciate it.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Sky Pilot Media, that's Sky's company. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/holypost. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news.